Hello and welcome back, and today I'm to look at two new 2-bays for the NAS market in summer 2020. These are two of the newest 2-bay releases respectively from Synology and Terramaster, two brands that not many people compare, largely because although network attached storage is something that is now bleeding more and more into both home and business users, it has to be said that the demographic for these two devices is actually quite different. However, a number of you that are taking the first tippy toes into this world of network attached storage, be it for multimedia use, localized backups, or for business use overall, are thinking, I've got to invest money in this technology and I don't know how it works. I want to make sure I get this purchase right the first time, so I want to get the very best I can for my money. But you look at how far your money stretches with companies like Synology and go, I can get a lot more for my money over here. And that's true. Between these two NAS providers, it has to be said that you do generally get a lot more hardware for your money with brands like Terramaster. In the terms of the food chain of network attached storage, I would say there are three, technically four tiers. The ones at the top are your hyperscale data center ultra use, like your HP, stuff like that, or HP even. Good lord, that was terrible. On top of that, you've got the next one afterwards, which is kind of your top tier NAS that is biting the toes of those top tiers. These are your Synology, your QNAPs, a little bit of your QSAN as well in there. These are brands that are producing large-scale NAS servers and fiber channel stuff, SAN rivaling solutions, flash station, and a lot more. Then under that, you've got this third tier where you have a bunch of companies that are kind of roughing it out amongst each other for the next pivot stop. And these are the ones that are biting on Synology and QNAP's heels. These are the ones that include Terramaster, Acerstore, Drobo, Thecus to a lesser degree, because unfortunately they go into the fourth category, which I don't really talk about, which is kind of a bit dead, which is a real shame. But these two brands bring a lot to the table in terms of hardware. However, it has to be said that they've both kind of picked their main selling point, and it's gone a very different way. They've, with the Synology, this DS720, prioritizing internal operations, and the Terramaster prioritizing external operations. These two NASes, which arrive at quite wildly different price points, do seemingly, for the most part, arrive with very, very similar hardware, but with their own big USP differing wildly. So what have they got in common? Well, obviously, they're both 2-bay NASes. They both support SATA-based hard drive and SSD media. In the time of recording, that means 16 TB drives from companies like Seagate Ironwolf and their 16 TB NAS drive, or maybe even the WD18 TBs as well, but those are more for data center use. On top of that, in terms of SATA-based hard drive, you're looking with MLC NAND, you're looking at 4 TB drives, although there are some 8 TB QLC, quad layer cell NAND SSDs out there, but I wouldn't really recommend them unless you're looking for more budget, cost-effective SSD. And that means with 2 drives you can get up to 32 gigabytes currently in terms of hard drives, and 8 to 16 terabytes in terms of SSDs. Now you have to factor RAID in, of course. And of course, both of these support different RAID configurations: RAID 0, RAID 1, JBOD. But it's worth highlighting that the Synology does arrive with its own hybrid RAID system known as SHR, which is a more fluid RAID system that lets you introduce different drives as well as make it easier to move drives between systems, something Synology are quite proud of, and they should be. Another similarity, they both utilize BTRFS as a file system of choice. You can utilize ext4, but both of them arrive with the option of BTRFS. What is BTRFS? I'm glad you asked. Thanks for asking. BTRFS is a file system that, although newer than the likes of ext4, and I know that makes a lot of business users a little bit dubious of it, but not a lot. Still, it's old enough. It's got things like file self-healing, where a checksum is created with every data transaction passing through the device, and a check at the beginning and end is done every time, and if something has changed, any kind of corruption, it repairs itself with the checksum. You've got shared folder duplication made near enough instantaneously, something that would normally take a great deal more time. On top of that, you have got probably my favorite feature of all, the idea that snapshots taken in the background, which is kind of images of data which take up less space, and then a historical record is made. So if something goes wrong, you can go, I want that record to retrieve. That is done in the background with a far smaller resource imprint than ext4 systems will utilize to do snapshots. On top of that, both of them take advantage of Celeron-based Celeron-based CPUs. Both of them take advantage of a 4-core Celeron-based processor, and they both arrive with a decent amount of memory. However, it's worth highlighting that the Terramaster arrives with a J3455 processor, slightly older of the two, which rates around 2100 to 2500 on CPU benchmark, and it is a 1.5 GHz to 2.3 GHz processor. And each one of those 4 cores work together to give you the likes of 4K transcoding, the likes of AES encryption, again 1080p transcoding as well, a large embedded graphics backup there of around, I think it's UHD 500 on that, and of course it arrives with DDR3 memory with 4 GB by default, which is an impressive amount for a 2-bay NAS that can be upgraded to 8 GB. Now, the Synology, on the other hand, arrives with a newer generation CPU, the J4125. That on CPU benchmark rates well over 3000 and is a 2.0 GHz processor that can be burst up to 2.7 per core. On top of that, it arrives with 2 GB of memory, which can weirdly be upgraded to just 6 GB, not 8 as the CPU actually supports. Now, it is DDR4 memory at 2666 MHz, but Synology does insist that you use their own official memory module sticks, which are a bit more expensive, and there is a slot inside. The Terramaster will allow you to use your own choice of Samsung, Kingston, Crucial Memory or whatever, but you do have to do a little bit more dismantling to get to the memory module inside. How both of these devices take advantage of that kind of memory increase, well, that's spread across a lot of the applications that we'll talk about later on. But other things they've got in common, they've both got 2 1GBE LAN ports on the rear, which is great. So again, 100 megabytes via any one of those RJ45 slots. But if you use link aggregation or port trunking, so if you've got a 2-port PC or a lag-supported switch, you can engage these 2 devices with that network of up to 2 GBE or around 200 megabytes. But, and this is one of the biggest differences between them, the F2-422 arrives with 10 gigabit Ethernet. It's got 2 1GBE ports and 10 GBE. Now, given the price difference between these 2 devices, of the Terramaster arriving at about 310 or 320, and the Synology arriving at around 420 to 430 currently, that £100 price difference, given that this has 10 GBE, is really, really interesting. Synology is a company that's always kept 10 GBE a little bit at a distance, particularly with direct access means of interacting with your NAS, favouring in a great, in the majority of ways, standard network protocol and internet-based access. You can, directly connect to a number of their devices that have 10 GBE, but generally 10 GBE has only really been featured on 8 bays and above in their product portfolio. Now, instead of 10 GBE on this device, because it has those 2 1GBEs, the hardware advantage this has is on the base 2 NVMe SSD bays. So that means you've got the 2 hard drive bays, which can be held in that RAID or SHR, but you can further improve the internal performance and therefore the fluidity and speed and IOPS between you and the multiple applications and third-party applications running on this device by installing up to 2 NVMe SSDs in the base. Now, these are, they're moderately expensive, but once you do them, you will notice a huge difference in performance between you and the NAS. It will be mostly background stuff and largely only affect small files, not big files, but the performance difference is certainly there. So the argument immediately between these 2 devices comes down to, if you're a third-party app user anyway, what matters more to you? Is it the fact that this device has much faster external speeds, or that this device has much faster internal speeds? Now, there are ways to leverage them both. Like, for example, the Synology has link aggregation, or you can use things like Presto File Server to create a much faster network with an intelligent sending system. You've also got caching there, which will create the feel of faster data access, as data is handled much more modularly. On top of that, you can of course take advantage of putting SSDs inside anyway, but you're still going to have slight bottleneck there externally. In the case of the Terramaster, it doesn't have SSD caching inside, but you can put SSDs inside for raw storage or utilize bays for SSD caching. Now, it is worth highlighting that this device here, because it's a 2-bay, you're, in most senses, never going to hit 1000 megs, which is what 10 GBE should give you. Because the hard drives, even the most enterprise-grade hard drives, will give you currently at most 250 to 260 megabytes per second read-write, and we're talking Pro, WD Gold, Exos, those sort of drives, they will not give you more than 250, 260. And even in a RAID 0 environment, you will only see an increase of about 120 to about 150 megs at most, which means you're not going to be getting more than about 400 or so megs max from 2 hard drives. If you put 2 SSDs inside, which typically all the blurb on SSD brands go, oh yeah, this drive will give you 550 megs per second. Honest, it's not the case. In an ideal scenario with random read-write of small files, you might get that. But typically, the majority of the cases, you're going to get 350 to 450 megabytes per second for an SSD, with an increase of around 150 to 200 overall speed if you combine 2 of them in a RAID 0. The result is you're not going to get more than about 500 to 600 megs from 2 SSDs. So in some regards, 1000 megabytes per second external, thanks to that 10 GBE, is a bit wasted. But it's actually not. There's a few ways in which you can get that speed. First and foremost, the idea that you can use external drives or have multiple users interacting with this device. And if you have media that can deal with those kind of IOPS, where multiple users are dealing with the media at the same time, so step away from hard drives and into SSDs, there is a way that you can open up that 1000 megs and get 1000 megs. It will just be across different users. Secondly, you can get hard drive adapters like this one from QNAP, the QD8A2AR, which is a 2-bay RAID enabled adapter. This isn't just 2 bays, this has got 2 bays and a RAID controller built in, which will take up one 3.5-inch slot. So you could put 2 of these with 4 SSDs inside that, and then you've got this 4-bay where you can either have 4 SSDs, or you could have 1 hard drive and 2 SSDs for caching, or 4 SSDs with 2 of them caching, 2 of them storage. You can put 2.5-inch hard drives inside. There's a lot of options to get that 1000 megs. But these are all additional expenses, and these are things that you might wonder about spending that extra money on, because in many ways the Terramaster is kind of a NAS of compromise. We have to be realistic about this. The Synology product is the more complete package. It is a much better defined hardware and software purchase in terms of NAS. The hardware is good, although in some cases, even though it has a better CPU and better memory and the NVMe SSD caching, it doesn't have that 10 GBE. And for some of you, that is the killer factor, because the lowest price you can get a Synology with 10 GBE is going for something like the DS1618 Plus, which is like a £600-700 NAS, and then you have to put 10 GB in it manually. So you're talking 800 plus spend for a 10 GBE NAS, and you're going to have 6 bays of storage. Again, 310 quid. That's a big old saving, and that money could be going to better things like storage media. But at the same time, the hardware on this still has the caching. It still has expandability, the ability to add 5 more drives, thanks to the SATA expansion DX517. And in terms of software, they're just not comparable. Terramaster does a really good job with its TOS 4.1 platform. There are lots of apps. It's very stable now. It looks very, very slick. There's many, many apps, lots of first-party apps, and the core applications are there. Music, photo, video streaming, Apple Time Machine backup, Snapshot, a storage manager, NAS to cloud synchronization and backups, NAS to NAS rsync. All of those features that people want are present, along with some third-party ones which I think could do better. A third-party container app, a third-party VM Java app, which is not great. Surveillance app is near enough non-existent. And they're as smooth as it is, it lacks a lot of the thrills and spills of the Synology, with its enormous number of collaboration suite apps like Synology Chat, Synology Office, Synology Drive, Synology Calendar, Synology Surveillance Station, Active Backup Suite, Virtual Machine Manager. These are just a few, and not including Photo Station, Video Station, Music Station, and Synology Moments. like the AI-powered photo recognition tool. When you are buying a Synology NAS, if you compare these two for hardware, it may seem that it comes up a bit wanting for that external speed, but you are paying for a combined package, and a big chunk of that money is DSM 6.2, which is easily the most evolved platform. QNAP's QTS is damn close, but DSM still wins the day. Third-party apps, there's a lot more meeting in the middle there, with both of them supporting Plex, both of them supporting a lot of those third-party clouds tools, but the Synology still wins with increased support of things like Office 365 and G Suite, with synchronization of the account-wide stuff as well as localized files. And ultimately, the Synology brings more to the party in terms of software. So what this decision comes down to is, are you buying this for the hardware, or are you buying this for the software, or are you buying it for both? This is easily the most affordable 10 GBE NAS I've ever had here on the channel. Now, there are cheap 10 GBEs out there, and you might be looking at that going, oh, I've heard terrible things about cheap 10 GBE. And you're right to be, slightly worried. A lot of cheap 10 GBE solutions, they utilize these new processors from Quantia that have made 10 gigabit Ethernet a lot more affordable, but they still use shoddy CPUs. They use some of the crappy ARM 32-bit processors, some of your Annapurnas, which are great if you're on a tight budget, but they're never going to give you the performance of an Intel 64-bit x86 processor, which is what this has. This has the same CPU as the last and in some cases current generation of Synology, such as the 1019 Plus and the DS620 Slim. That generation of CPU is present here, and those NASs are less than a year old. What I'm saying is, although the CPU and memory in the Terramaster isn't as good as the Synology, it's pretty good and definitely enough for 10 GBE at this level. It's just not the complete package that the Synology is. And the DS720 Plus is expensive, but I think it justifies that price tag. So what it comes down to is what your priority is. Do you care about 10 GBE? Do you care about software? Do you care about a combined package? Do you care about saving a bit of money towards your storage media? Both of them have their own audience, and I hope this video has helped you decide which one best suits your needs. Click like if you've enjoyed this video, click subscribe to learn more, and do check out the reviews in the description below to NAS Compares, as well as visit the guides at span.com, the NAS experts. I will see you next time.